let's talk a little bit about the alternate static source in your airplane. Your plane should have an alternate static source. In our plane, it's right here, this red little thing. It says alternate static air pull on. Let's talk a little bit about that. I'm sure if you've at least done your instrument, even private, you should know what the alternate static does. So the alternate static basically feeds the instruments that utilize static information, static pressure, with static pressure from inside the cabin as opposed to outside the cabin. So this plane has two static ports, one on each side of the front cowling. But they could get frozen over or blocked, or for whatever reason, there's no, the static pressure, the ambient pressure has no ability to flow through and reach the instruments to do what they need to do. And so in that case,
just departed Palmdale, leaving 4,400.
In that case, our indications won't be accurate. So we want to make sure that our indications are accurate. So in a non-pressurized airplane, the pressure inside and outside the cabin should pretty much be similar. I don't want to say the same, but similar, because it's a non-pressurized cabin. So if I open the window right now, I mean, this plane is not sealed by no means, and it's not pressurized. So there's pretty similar pressure inside and outside. So what the alt static is for is in the event that our static ports block up, and they no longer are able to feed the system with static information, what we want to do is pull this, and that will open up and feed the system. It will basically transfer the source from where the instruments receive their static pressure from the outside of the cabin to the inside of the cabin. And I'm a big fan of actually experimenting with things in real life in the airplane to see it for yourself, because it's one thing to read things in the POH and to hear about and to talk about, and it's all fine and fun. But it's a whole other thing to have done it, to put your hand on it, to pull it, to see what it does, to see how it would affect your instruments. So there's no doubt as to what you can expect in the event that you actually need to utilize it in real life. So we'll go ahead and do it, but I strongly recommend that you, next time you fly, whatever your plane is, go ahead and don't do it without, I mean, ask your instructor or whatever if you want to, so they know what you're doing. But just go ahead and do it for the sake of seeing what it does and how it works and how it affects your instruments and how it affects your altitude, if at all, and so on and so forth. So here we go. Let's take a look. And while I pull this, I suggest you look at the altitude, the altimeter, because that's
124.6. 24.6, 17 November Golf.
Because that's pretty much where we'll see a big shift, because our static pressure is changing and the altimeter utilizes static pressure. As we know, it's static battling it out against sea level, standard sea level, which is 299 pressure, and that's how it generates an altitude indication. So check this out. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. So I'm pulling it, and look at that. We ended up with a slightly low reading, and the autopilot, of course, is correcting right back up to 85, which is what we selected, and it settles back down at 85. We didn't even lose 100 feet, so it's negligible. 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 Now, guess what? If I push this back in, the same thing will happen to the opposite direction. So the pressures are slightly different, very negligible. Nothing happened. Your passengers would sleep right through it. And I recommend that you do it in your plane next time you fly, just so it's one less thing that you look at and are intimidated by. I'll tell you what, here, let's push this in. We'll talk about it for a second. So there we go. You can see the same thing to the opposite direction. Not even 50 feet. Not even 50 feet. There we have it, and 8,500 feet. Here's something that I know I experienced in flight training, and I hate for people to experience it too. When I got into these planes, when I was new to airplanes, I was foreign. I didn't grow up flying. I didn't have anyone in my family who flies. I still don't have anyone in my family who flies. So this environment was beyond foreign to me, as expected. It was all new. Not only was it foreign, all these knobs and buttons and different colors, and it was just this whole, like, what the heck are these things? And I spent a lot of my training. I didn't do this in training like this, because not all flight instructors are me. In fact, everyone's different. But I spent a lot of my training sitting here in that seat just looking at things going, man, I've heard about it. We talk about it. I know how to answer the question if the examiner asks me on the check ride what this does, but I have no clue how it will affect my autopilot or the airplane or the flight or whatever, how it will affect anything if I pulled it, if I had to rely on it. And I spent a lot of my training. I spent a lot of my training sitting here in the seat just looking at stuff, wondering what it would be like if I actually went ahead and used it, or if I had to ever use it. And so I don't want my students to go through that, and I don't want you to go through that, because you don't have to go through that. And so when you fly in the plane, play with things. Just go ahead and pull your static source. Do whatever you need to do. I'll give you another example. Right now, I'll give you a great example of what you should do as well in the plane, just because we're talking about this on the topic. And this specifically doesn't have to do with alt static, but it has to do with going ahead and experimenting in your specific airplane. How will your autopilot handle a certain situation? Because you could read about it in the POH, you could read about it in the Garmin booklet, you could read about it in your autopilot book, you could read about it on Google, but until you've done it in your airplane, you haven't confirmed that this is what you can expect. So here's something that I do. Here's something that I personally do in every single plane I ever get into, is I go ahead and engage the autopilot at cruise, and I set it to a certain altitude. And I am curious, of course there's no FADEC in this airplane, there's no auto throttle, so the autopilot does not control my power. And so I'm curious, obviously, how will my autopilot handle a distraction on my part where there's an insufficient amount of power to maintain altitude. It pitched up all it can, and now we're approaching a stall. What will the autopilot do? Will it let me stall, or will it begin descending to prevent exceeding the critical angle of attack? So because I'm curious about that, let's put that to the test. So I told the plane to maintain 8,500 feet, and here we go. I'm going ahead and reducing power. So I'm reducing my power. That's all I'm doing. I'm reducing my power. That's good. 15 inches is good. And see what the autopilot does. So the autopilot is a really, really good system in terms of listening to you and doing what you want. So we told it to maintain 8,500 feet. That's what it will do until it can no longer do it. And so right now it could still do it.
November 53 Whiskey, 53 Whiskey.
And what it's doing to make that happen is pitching up. So you can see the command bar is going up. So there's 2.5 degrees. Speed obviously is bleeding up. There's 3 degrees of pitch.
November 15 Golf, contact SoCal approach 124.6.
24.6 at 125 Golf. Still maintaining 8,500 feet. Airspeed's bleeding off. There's 5 degrees of pitch. And approach, good afternoon, station air 1215 Golf, level 8,500, direct Santa Monica for LA Special Flight.
November 1215 Golf, SoCal approach. For now, maintain VFR at or above 4,500, Burbank altimeter 2981.
At or above 4,500 at 2981, 1215 Golf. 8,500 feet. There's 6 degrees of pitch. 6 degrees of pitch. It's trying. It's trying. Look at that. 85. It's trying. Speed's coming down. Speed's coming down. Speed's coming down. There's 7.5 degrees of pitch. 7.5 degrees of pitch. Speed is coming down. It's trying. It's trying. It's trying really hard. Let me give it some right rudder here to stay coordinated. There we go. It's trying. There's 85. Let me reduce power a little more. There we go. It's trying. It's maintaining 85. 85.
Whiskey, enter your left base at or above 3,000.
And look at what's happening. Look at what's happening. It can no longer maintain 8,500 feet because it would stall. It would reach its critical angle of attack. Look at what the autopilot's doing. I didn't lower my floor. Look at what it's doing. It's entering. It's entering into whichever slight descent it has to enter into to maintain lift on the wings to not exceed the critical. And it will continue to go up or down, maintaining that minimum airspeed that we could go ahead and fly with. So if I take the power completely out, right there, look at what the plane will do on its own. I did not ask it to descend, and look at what it's doing. On its own, it's preventing a stall from happening. So taking this up, and there we go, let me add the power back in. So taking this up to cruise, or even in your own airplane, doing this. and then it just runs back to 85, disregarding everything. So you gotta catch it. Doing this in your airplane, lots of right rudder. It's coming back to 85. There we go. Now it will settle in. There we go. So doing this in your airplane will give you a really good idea. Will give you a really good idea as to what you can expect in the event. In the event that you got distracted and the autopilot, and you ask the autopilot to maintain altitude. I know in this plane, the worst thing that'll happen is I'll descend, but at least I won't stall. So it has some good underspeed protection and really stall protection. So that's pretty cool. I could read about it in a book, and that's what I would do if I were doing my private pilot training, because my head at the time hasn't yet reached a point as a pilot where I figured that I don't need to wait for an emergency to find that information out. I didn't realize that I could go on a generic flight and just do that and just see for myself what it does. So keep that in mind. Don't be that pilot who doesn't experiment. So get out there and pull your alternate static source. Ask your autopilot to maintain altitude and pull the power. And experiment and see what your plane will do under certain circumstances. And at that point, believe me, you'll become much more one with your airplane, and it's a great feeling. So get out there and do that, and you'll find that you'll feel much more confident flying your airplane. It's amazing how that works.
For 44 Juliet Charlie, sir, departure at a contact on maintain 1.
All right, so she